Hey, that's my driveway. She didn't even slow down. The cigarette glowed once between her fingers, a tiny orange eye looking back at me, and then she flicked it. It skipped twice on the concrete and came to rest near my mailbox, still smoking. She kept walking, heels tapping like punctuation marks I hadn't asked for. If you like the video, please subscribe. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the smoke curl, listening to the late afternoon birds settle into the trees, trying to decide if I'd just imagined the disrespect and the casual roll of her wrist. I've always lived quietly, not lonely, deliberately quiet. My house sits at the end of a narrow cul-de-sac that borders a strip of preserved woodland. Tall pines, scrub oak, a creek you can hear in the early mornings if the wind is right. I chose it because it felt insulated from the world's noise. No through traffic, no foot traffic except the occasional dog walker cutting through to the trailhead. My mornings follow the same pattern. Coffee on the back porch, steam lifting into cool air, the sound of wind and needles, a notebook on my lap where I write a few lines of whatever drifts through my head before the day starts asking for things. I work remotely. Data analysis. Quiet work. Solitary work. The kind of job where the biggest drama is whether a query returns in 5 seconds or 6. Peace isn't something I take for granted. I protect it. So when that cigarette butt showed up on my driveway, it felt invasive. Small, sure, but wrong. Like someone leaving a muddy footprint on your clean kitchen floor. I bent down, picked it up with a paper towel, and dropped it into the trash. Problem solved, I told myself. The next day, there were 2. The day after that, 4. Always in roughly the same area, near the mailbox, near the edge where my driveway meets the sidewalk, like breadcrumbs of carelessness. I started noticing her then. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Athletic walk. Sunglasses even when the sun wasn't doing much. She lived 3 houses down, the one with the freshly resurfaced pool and the loud patio furniture that never seemed to get put away. I'd seen her plenty of times before, without really seeing her. She was just another neighbor-shaped object moving through my peripheral vision. Until the cigarettes. I caught her again one afternoon. I was watering the small herb garden near the driveway. She walked past, took a drag, glanced briefly in my direction, and flicked. It landed 6 feet from my shoes. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice calm, neutral. "Could you not throw those on my property?" She paused, looked me up and down slowly, like she was appraising a dented car. "They're biodegradable," she said. "They're not. They've got plastic filters. They don't break down." She shrugged, a faint smile, not friendly, amused. "It's outside. Relax." And she walked away. I stood there with the hose still running, water pooling at my feet. Something tightened in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like a boundary being pressed to see if it would hold. That night I found 3 more butts near the curb. The next morning, 5. I started picking them up daily, gloves on, a small bucket by the garage. I told myself it was temporary, that she'd get bored or forget or find another route. Instead, it accelerated. Sometimes she'd flick them harder. Sometimes she'd deliberately look over at my house while she did it. Once she laughed, not loudly, just a little breath of sound that carried farther than it should have. I tried again, polite, calm. "Please stop throwing trash on my driveway." Her face hardened. "You don't own the sidewalk." "I'm not talking about the sidewalk. I'm talking about my driveway." She stepped closer, invading my space just enough to make the air feel crowded. "You people always think you own everything." I didn't even know what she meant by that. I didn't ask. I watched her walk away, cigarette already lit for the next toss. That night I sat on my porch and watched the shadows creep across the concrete. The driveway looked clean. Too clean. Like a blank page waiting for vandalism. It wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was intentional. The cigarette butts multiplied like a slow infestation,
10 a day, 20, sometimes more on weekends. They collected in the seams of the concrete, in the gutter, in the little gravel strip near the fence. When it rained, the smell intensified, wet tobacco and ash, sour and stale. I installed a small security camera above the garage, not pointed aggressively, just enough to cover the driveway and sidewalk edge. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't trying to escalate. I just wanted proof. I emailed the HOA, a polite message with timestamps and a couple of still images from the footage. Her mid-flick, the glowing arc of the cigarette leaving her hand. They replied with boilerplate language about neighbor disputes and encouraged direct resolution. Direct resolution had already failed, so I contacted the city's littering enforcement line, left a message, sent photos, waited. Nothing. Meanwhile, she noticed a camera. The next day, she stood directly in its line of sight and flicked a cigarette with theatrical flair, a little bow afterward like a performer acknowledging applause. A few days later, a notice appeared on my door from the HOA, unauthorized surveillance equipment visible from common areas. Violation warning. I called them immediately. That camera is on my property, I said. It's pointed at my driveway because someone keeps throwing trash on it. Well, the woman on the phone said carefully, your neighbor feels uncomfortable. I almost laughed. Instead, I removed the camera and repositioned it inside, behind a tinted window. Still legal, still capturing everything, just less obvious. That's when the rumors started. At the mailbox cluster one afternoon, a neighbor I barely knew avoided eye contact. Another gave me a thin, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. I overheard snippets. He's filming people. Creepy. Always watching. She'd been talking, painting herself as the victim, the harmless walker being monitored by the strange quiet guy at the end of the cul-de-sac. Isolation crept in quietly. Invitations stopped, casual nods disappeared, the invisible social fabric thinned around me, and the cigarettes kept coming. I started logging them. Date, time, weather, count. A notebook became a ledger, then a spreadsheet. I tracked wind patterns, rain dispersion, how many ended up in the storm drain, how many were intact versus crushed. I didn't know why yet, only that something in me had shifted from irritated neighbor to careful observer. One evening while reviewing footage, I noticed something odd. She wasn't just throwing cigarettes. Occasionally, she dumped the ashtray from her car window as she parked down the street, a clatter of filters bouncing onto the pavement, more than a casual smoker would generate on walks alone. Out of curiosity, I looked up her address in the county records. The house was listed under an LLC. Interesting. A little more digging, publicly available court records showed 2 past civil complaints related to property disputes, both settled quietly. One involved improper waste disposal. That's when the pattern clicked into place. This wasn't random entitlement. This was habitual boundary abuse. I invested in better storage, clear bins, labeled, date ranges. I kept every butt I collected sealed in bags. It was disgusting work. My garage smelled faintly like an old bar, no matter how much baking soda I used. Friends asked why I seemed distracted. I gave vague answers. Meanwhile, the HOA fined me again, this time for harassment concerns. No evidence, just a complaint. I appealed, lost. The sense of injustice gnawed at me late at night. Not explosive rage, something colder, more focused, like a chessboard forming in my head. Then came the moment that looked like defeat. A letter arrived from the HOA's legal counsel warning of potential action if I continued documenting neighbors without consent and creating a hostile environment. I was being painted as the aggressor. For a full day, I considered letting it go. Selling the house, starting fresh somewhere else. Peace has value. Sometimes you pay to protect it. That evening, I sat on the porch and listened to the creek again. Frogs chirping, wind brushing branches, the kind of quiet you don't easily replace. No, I wasn't leaving. I shifted from defense to strategy. I filed a public records request with the city sanitation department regarding her address. 2 prior warnings for improper disposal tied to the LLC, 1 unresolved fine. I installed a higher resolution camera inside, redundant storage, cloud backup. I purchased a digital scale, started weighing the collected butts. I talked to a retired friend who used to work in environmental compliance. He explained how cigarette filters qualify as plastic waste, how dumping them intentionally could trigger municipal fines if documented properly. Slowly, a plan assembled itself, and then I waited. By month 8, I had just over 5,000 cigarette butts. 5,000 small, identical insults. Bagged, cataloged, photographed, weighed. The garage smelled awful. My patience smelled like iron. I stopped complaining, stopped contacting the HOA, stopped reacting at all. From the outside, it looked like I'd surrendered. She grew bolder. Sometimes she'd toss 2 at once. Sometimes she'd deliberately crush one into the concrete with her heel before flicking another. Once, she made direct eye contact and smiled. Overconfidence is a strange drug. The trap was simple. I waited for the annual neighborhood pool party, her event. She hosted it every summer. Dozens of neighbors, HOA board members, a casual social environment where she felt untouchable. The night before, I sealed all 5,000 cigarette butts into mesh laundry bags, the kind that allow water flow but keep contents contained. 5 large bags, heavy, reeking. Early the next morning, before anyone was awake, I entered her backyard through the unlocked side gate. It wasn't trespassing in the criminal sense, shared access easement clearly posted. I documented my entry on my own camera for transparency. I gently lowered the bags into her pool. They sank slowly, like ghostly jellyfish. By noon, the smell hit. People started gathering, confusion, wrinkled noses. Someone shouted about the water looking cloudy. Maintenance was called. The bags were pulled out. 5,000 cigarette butts spilled onto the deck. Silence fell like a dropped plate. She went pale. "What the hell is this?" someone demanded. I stepped forward calmly. "Those are yours," I said, "from my driveway over the last 8 months." She laughed, too fast, too loud. "That's insane." I pulled out my phone. Dates, video clips, close-ups, timestamps, logs, weights, city records. The HOA president's face shifted as the evidence scrolled. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." She started yelling, accusing, deflecting, but every sentence tangled itself deeper. "I only smoke occasionally." Video. "Those could be planted." Continuous footage. "You're stalking me." Public sidewalk, documented times, legal placement. The maintenance crew supervisor quietly stepped away to call the city environmental office. Within an hour, 2 inspectors arrived. They reviewed the footage, the logs, the prior unresolved fine under her LLC. Fines stacked quickly. Illegal dumping, environmental contamination, harassment, property damage, HOA violations, potential civil liability for cleanup costs. Her voice cracked, her posture collapsed, the power drained out of her like air from a punctured tire. Neighbors avoided her eyes now. 3 months later, she sold the house. The HOA revised its policies. The fines were paid. My driveway stayed clean. The quiet returned slowly, like a cautious animal stepping back into a clearing. Birds resumed their patterns. The creek whispered the same old stories. My coffee tasted like mornings again instead of tension. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just balance restored. Sometimes dignity means standing your ground long enough for the truth to speak for itself. If you've ever been pushed quietly, invisibly, underestimated, you know how heavy that pressure can feel. Have you ever had to stand your ground when someone thought you wouldn't?